Lots of people sitting there in the waiting room, I could see, and sitting there as we watch the countdown. Lots of cameras off, but hopefully if you're there now, we can get the cameras back on. It makes it feel like I'm talking to a room full of people rather than squares of screens. But it's good to see you all back. Hopefully you had a nice lunch. I know we've got a couple of people still joining us, but we'll be able to get moving very shortly. So we'll just give people maybe another 30 seconds to join in, and then we will get started. Okay, it looks like we've got most people in now, so I think we'll just get moving. So again, welcome back. Hope you had a good lunch and a good break and time to kind of reflect a bit on some of the lots of information that we shared with you this morning, lots of different speakers, lots of different potential ideas for the type of change that you might want to think about recommending. So this afternoon, there's no more evidence. There's really focusing this afternoon on you getting to speak to each other, start with, and then in your groups to really start working on thinking about, well, what sort of changes do you want to focus on? What sort of things do you want to begin considering how we build recommendations on? And again, we're looking back at our two questions this afternoon, both how should Scotland rebalance its diet, tackle the climate emergency in an effective and fair way, and how should Scotland change how it uses its land to tackle the climate emergency in a fair and effective and fair way? So they're really our two big questions for the afternoon. But before we go back into the breakout groups, we know that each group's been having their own conversation. Each group has found different things that have kind of excited them or grabbed their attention. So we just wanted to create a bit of an opportunity for you to hear from each other as well and get a bit of a flavour of some of the things that have been talked about in some of the other groups as well. So we're going to start with the diet question about how should Scotland rebalance its diet to tackle the climate emergency in an effective and fair way. And I know we've got volunteers from most of the groups lined up to be able to give us a little flavour of what they focused on, what they thought was actually there's scope to do something, to develop some recommendations on. So first up, and I hope you're there and ready, I'm going to call on Dan from Group 1. I believe you were going to sort of feedback on behalf of your group some of the sort of key areas that you were focusing on.
Hi, yeah. So we had for diet, our overarching biggest ticket was really to make it more normal to eat healthy food and healthy for the environment as well as the individual. We had a lot of other tickets on the sort of the rainbow chart, but it all seemed to be focusing around just changing what's normal. So that was in the ticket that we picked was in the society and the norms and values and beliefs bit. So yeah, so it seemed the most fair way to make a change is to change people's habits, I guess.
Yep, that idea of changing what seems normal. So, yeah. Great. No, thanks very much, Dan. That's great. I'm going to jump to Group 3 now, and I think we've got Stuart from Group 3 was going to feedback a little for us. Great.
Well, we discussed a wide range of possible actions to take to get people to change their diet, but we agreed that the main point we wanted to bring forward was that a carbon tax should be introduced on foodstuffs based on the total carbon emissions used in the production, transport, packaging and disposal of the product. Beef was particularly mentioned as a product which should be taxed, but this proposal for a carbon tax was subject to one major condition, that everyone should be able to afford to eat and to feed themselves. And the group strongly agreed that the right to food should be incorporated in Scottish law. Another point that was discussed was labelling of food. And it was felt that we should have information on food packaging regarding carbon emissions.
Okay, so Thank you very much, there, Stuart. That's great, and that idea of that's a right to food. Although we're looking at these sort of taxes potentially as a way forward and a way of helping make that shift to the norm, but actually people still need to be able to, as you say, afford to be able to feed themselves and their families. Okay, I'm doing this in a bit of a random order, but I'm going to jump to group 5 now, and I believe we've got Lewis lined up to give us a bit of feedback.
Hi. Yeah, so the thing we were really keen on was reducing the food waste, and the major suggestions we had for that were legislation to ban buy one get one free, so people don't buy unnecessary food just because it looks like a good deal, and also particularly for perishable foods like fruit and vegetables, to try and make sure that they're packaged in reasonable amounts. Like everyone's known the frustration of going to the shops and having to buy a bag of 10 potatoes or avocados or whatever it is, massive amounts of vegetables or fruit, and then you get home and then within a few days you've only eaten 2 of them and most of them have gone rotten. So to reduce that food waste, there should be legislation introduced or there's something at the policy level that means that foods are sold in appropriate amounts to reduce waste.
Okay, thanks very much, Lewis. So again, a different focus from that group there, but really focusing in on the waste and the types of mechanisms that could be put in place to stop those things that seem like a good deal at the time, but as you say, you've had to buy a whole lot, and it's natural that things don't always get used if you're buying them in that way. Can I come to group 2 now? And I believe we've got Andrew ready to give us a bit of feedback.
Hi, yeah. One of the kind of main things that we were focused on was about kind of in government and public services, procuring better and like good food for public services in schools, hospitals, and making the default options more plant-based, to try and, which would obviously make the health and environmental impact better in those services, but also have a knock-on effect on society and encouraging more plant-based meals.
Okay, thanks a lot, Andrew. So again, another tack on this idea that using those procurement powers to actually be able to influence and nudge towards those changes that start looking at changing that idea of the norms and what is considered to be the norms, the values that we all operate within. And I think the last group I have now would be group 4, and I think we've got Ian lined up to give us a bit of feedback on behalf of your group where you've been focusing.
Yeah, thanks. Very similar to group 2 Andrew's just been talking about. I'll just read you the notes I've scribbled down about it. With food, to encourage a culture of low carbon food consumption and start to change people's habits and how and what they want to eat. All canteens and food outlets which are public or state run should offer food in canteens with low carbon footprint, be it schools, nurseries to help educate our children's palates at a young age, through to food outlets in public service buildings, local authority and hospital canteens and cafes, local authority run services like sports centres and grant funded events like gala days and civic events, that the food offered, less meat and dairy, locally sourced produce, and using low carbon cooking techniques. And just as Andrew was saying, it leaches into the culture of the people who use these services.
Great, thanks a lot, Ian. And again, it's great to hear that actually we had all these different presentations yesterday, that we're all sort of coming forward with different ideas about what they thought actually could help make a difference, and that some of these have sort of stuck in your minds and start to go, actually, yeah, I could see that working. So when we come back when you go back into your groups this afternoon, you'll have an opportunity to develop some of these ideas up even further. So I'm now going to come to the land use question. So really it's about, and that's what we were looking at this morning. And I know it was it's a little bit harder to sort of get your head around initially because, you know, at least with food, we all know what we do. We all know how we make our own choices about what we eat. So it's easy to think about how that could change. But there was lots of ideas presented this morning around land use. So I'm going to call on, I think we've got Ellie from Group 1. Are you ready to give us a bit of feedback about something that came up in your group, particularly as a focus?
Yeah, we had a really nice debate around the topic, and we had Dr. Callum MacLeod in our group, which was really insightful from Community Land Trust. We talked about restoring woodlands and peatlands and shifting to more nature-based methods of land management, for example, in agriculture. And we wanted to question forestry a bit further, but we felt that at like a kind of public policy level, land reform was really important. So questioning distribution of land and ownership to kind of alleviate some barriers that might be there in place to shift to these new methods. And we also liked the land's carbon tax idea presented by the John Muir Trust. We thought that would be an effective intervention that would help bring about kind of richer biodiversity, ecosystems, and a more like productive, resilient kind of way to reduce carbon. Yeah.
Okay, great, Ali, thank you for that. And again, picking up on some of the ideas that the speakers presented about, you know, how we really can think about the different types of incentives that can be put in place to get land operating in ways that may help us move towards this more low carbon future. Can I call on Shona now from Group 2? I believe you're set to give us some feedback on your group's discussion.
Yes, I think we too came to the conclusion that there was a lot needed in the way of regulation, legislation and taxation. In fact, although a lot of the things seemed good ideas, like the idea of the community land ownership and so on, it's how do you achieve these? How do you achieve the better land or different land use than we currently have? So certainly an emphasis on that. We also, I think a recurring theme we've had over the weekend has been about the need for a joined up approach. So that was talked about a fair amount this morning. And the long-term, the need to have a long-term strategy. So not just sort of looking for the quick fix for now, but looking ahead to what we do want there in 40, 50 years' time. Also the sort of disparity between rural versus urban responsibilities and how we can maybe, what could be done to try and maybe even those out somehow. You know, not putting all the responsibility onto the people who live in rural areas.
No, that's great. Thank you very much, Shona. And I think, you know, what it sounds like your group's starting to really grapple with is where do we make some of these trade-offs between, you know, that sort of public policy interventions and communities being able to have a bit of control of their own futures as well, and how their environments and space is there. And yeah, the urban-rural one I think will be a particularly interesting one when you get back into your groups this afternoon to start looking at where some of those trade-offs might have to get made, or might, you know, when we're thinking about recommendations. Coming to Group 3 now. Neil, I think we've got you ready to feedback from Group 3.
Yes, thanks very much. Our group enjoyed all 4 presentations that we got in the last session this morning, but we were particularly engaged with the presentations by Mike from the John Muir Trust and by Dr. Callum MacLeod from Community Land Scotland. Similar to Group 1 and what Ellie was saying. The carbon land tax is an idea that we believed could be an equitable and just solution, although we noted concerns around how the tax might impact on rural jobs. We were concerned that maybe extra financial pressures on landowners would force them into maybe counterproductive cost savings. We also noted as a group that some landowners are already making the correct decisions with regard to climate change, and they need our continued support. So we talked about a bigger carrot to go with a bigger stick. As a group, we wish to commend the excellent work already carried out by Community Lands Scotland. We were all very impressed with what Dr. MacLeod has done and what he's trying to convince us to do in the future. And we would be keen to have our final recommendations include further support for his organisation. We discussed if they want a 20 million budget, we should give them a 40 million budget. Our view is that socially just land reform, including pre-purchase tests and further strengthening of community rights to buy, were areas that we would like to see the Assembly focus on.
Okay, great. So a lot of things covered there, but very much again that balance. And I like the phrase that you had there about both bigger carrot and bigger sticks. So it's not just about the regulation and the enforcement, but how do you both influence people and landowners and others to be able to make choices that are going to contribute to the wider goals as well, and recognise those who are. Okay, coming on to group 4 now. Do we have Forbes? I think you've volunteered to come forward for your group.
Yeah. Just echoing more of what's already been said. We quite like the idea of the carbon tax, although we're not sure how that would work. We'd just like to explore that more and how it would impact on the kind of people that own the land, etc.
Mm-hmm.
It was more like a shared approach through organisations to share information and possibly even resources to get this common goal. There's lots of organisations, including NGOs, are all like working to the same purpose, but no one's communicating maybe that good. This what's the term is going to be, the joined up sort of thinking could probably benefit. There's also excuse me, also like the community run land ownership projects. That was really good. I'd like to see sort of more of that and people being enabled to do that. But in saying that, the private run thing as well, if the land's been looked after and it's been cultivated for being environmentally friendly and sound and all that business, that's also good. So I think we just need to, if the land's not being taken care of in that sense, then I think possibly need to buy back and put it into the hands of people that would take care of it.
Okay, so yeah, definitely some scope there where you're talking about changing land, particularly land that's maybe not being looked after and managed in the most effective ways at the moment. And echoes back to some of the earlier comments there about that idea of joined up working, joined up thinking, so that actually there's a clear route map of where we're heading. And for our last group in this section, I think we've got Annette lined up to feedback on behalf of group 5.
Yeah, I think we're pretty much in line with everything that has gone previously regards to land ownership and looking into that, community ownership and who uses the land and what they use it for with the pre-ownership sort of tests. But our main sort of focus ultimately was to have a regulatory framework from which you could hang all of those ideas from. So within that regulatory framework, you would have the carbon tax ideas, whether that's on the food labelling or whether that's also on the land ownership. And therefore, you would encourage, through that regulatory approach, an integrated sort of holistic view to the whole, to the whole issue of agriculture and food production and how people use the land as well, whether it's maybe for wind farms and things like that. So we asked Stephen Young from the Scottish Land and Estates to come in because we did like the land carbon tax idea, and we wanted to sort of get their feedback as to what their members might think about that. You did say they might be a bit wary at first, but also the amount of land that the John Muir Trust suggested, I think, was land of over 1,000 acres, and we wanted to know, is that, I mean, I don't know how big 1,000 acres is, and Stephen Young did say that that's actually quite a large land area, and so the devil would be in the detail as to how that carbon tax would actually work and whether it would actually raise funds because it might be targeting the wrong areas,
Yeah, devil in the detail, as you were saying. Sorry, I wasn't trying to cut you off there, Annette. Were you...
No, that's
great. Okay. Look, again, lots of crossovers between the groups, but also lots of slightly different takes and some of the different things sort of picked up for you. And I'm sure when you go back into the groups, although, people had to choose really to feedback on focusing on one particular thing, as we've been thinking about where action can be taken at all these different levels, then actually when you go back this afternoon, there may be things that start to build together to form a kind of suite of potential recommendations. Before we go into the breakout groups, and we really are going to spend most of the afternoon in your groups where you can just work with your facilitators and actually make sure that we've got this captured in a way that reflects what you're trying to achieve. I'm just going to spend a little bit of time, and I know it said there was no evidence, but you do get a little presentation from me. And really it's just, we'd had a few questions, and I know it's a bit hard to imagine how we get from these discussions into actually necessarily a set of recommendations that come out on behalf of the Assembly as a whole. So I'm just going to talk you through, I guess, what that process is going to be like over the next couple of weekends, the next few times we're together. And to do that really before you start actually capturing the recommendations that you, as the Assembly members, will actually want to make. So to do that, I'm just going to share my screen and share a little bit of a presentation with you. So just give me a second to get that up. So we're talking about the process that we're going to go through to actually sort of develop recommendations on behalf of the Assembly. Start. Okay, so I want to take you back, before we go any further, I want to take you right back to the beginning where actually, let's think about what the remit of the Assembly is. And we talked about this in weekend one, but just to remind you, that as it was set out in the Climate Change Scotland Act 2019, it calls for the Citizens' Assembly to come into being and to make recommendations on measures to achieve Scotland's emission reduction targets. And in line with the question that we've been given, we're being asked to do this and produce recommendations that will enable this to happen in an effective and fair way. And in order to do this, you've already spent almost 3 weekends learning about the current situation and exploring avenues for making change, including over the last 2 days, hearing some sort of specific proposals from different groups and advocacy groups. So we're now going to start the process of really creating those recommendations. And the recommendations that we're going to be working on in our small group will end up being voted on by all of the Assembly members and potentially included within the Assembly's report to Parliament if they're agreed and endorsed by the majority. But to do this will be a multi-stage process that we are starting this afternoon. And we recognise that some of you have been a bit frustrated by not being able to jump straight in to just putting forward solutions, particularly to things that some of you, had already thought about and knew about and actually saw as being quite obvious and necessary. But we hope that, at least in retrospect, when you think back, that the different lenses that we've been bringing to the problem, the different lenses we've been asking you to sort of think about some of the issues through, actually will have been valuable in opening up the wide range of potential recommendations that could be what you choose to focus on, whether that's focusing on change at an individual level or through policy and institutional changes or wholesale whole big scale systemic change to the norms and the expected structures of society. where you focus is up to you, and hopefully, you know, we'll have a range of things that start looking at how change can happen in a variety of different ways. I'm just going to go back and share the screen again, just to sort of give you a bit more detail of what is coming next.
Yeah, that's the way we go.
Okay, so the first step, we've got our question. So the first step, and what we're going to start this afternoon, is developing the framework for the sort of provisional recommendations. I say provisional at the moment because we're going to be working on them and testing them out and adapting them as we go along. Okay, so we're going to start identifying the types of recommendations you want to make to address the first of our themes content, so around diet and land use. And across all of the groups, and this is also happening in the other rooms as well, we're going to be using this sort of standard sort of template to collect this information up. And I know this is a bit blurry. When you actually see it in your groups, it will be a lot less blurry, I promise. But really focusing on not just what is the action we need, but what is the challenge or the issue, the problem? What are we actually seeking to address? What are we trying to achieve by our recommendation? What's the purpose behind it? What will change because of it? The type of action you're suggesting. And, you know, for some groups and some of the things that you're looking at, this will be a quite specific statement because it might be picking up directly from one of the things that you've heard about. But for other things, it's okay at this stage to be a bit vaguer about what, you know, it might be. We'll have the opportunity to develop that up. We need to think about who needs to take the action, whether it is a government action, whether it's particular institutions or public services, and coming back to that considerations relating to fairness. What does this mean for fairness? Because actually, you know, some things will have different impacts on different groups in the population, and also any other considerations. And this might be things like, you know, as I think it was raised by, I can't remember, one of our people feeding back earlier, that, you know, this will only work if certain other conditions are in place to make it most effective. So today, really, it's not so much about finally crafting the wording of a specific recommendation, but rather focusing on what it really is trying to do. We can get the wording right later. So between now and when we come back together in the fourth weekend, the work you do in small groups today will be consolidated together, because even as we've heard there may be groups working on very, very similar proposals and may end up focusing on the same aspects of the topic. When it is the case that actually people have come up with very, very, very similar, we'll do some work in the background to blend the proposals together, but only when it really has identified as being trying to solve the same problem and proposing the same solution. If the groups are, you know, if in different groups you're actually looking at the same problem but have come up with different measures, then these will remain separate and come back to you as a range of things to be considered. Then there's the process of the sort of technical refinement, okay? And that's something that the evidence group and the evidence leads are going to be involved in. You've spent a lot of time learning about the climate emergency and the Scottish context in relation to climate change, but no one expects you all to be experts in, you know, the mechanisms of government at the moment and the different layers of government, the respective powers that maybe Scottish government, UK government and local government holds, you know, and how policy proposals are actually put together. That, you know, some of you will have a lot of knowledge about this, but some of you won't, and that's okay. So this is why we've got the expert leads in place, and they'll be invited to review the kind of the frameworks that you come up with this afternoon, and then when we meet again, and ensure that any of the recommendations that we're making as an assembly are actually able to kind of land in an appropriate place. For example, you know, if a group said, right, we want to propose legislative change to achieve X, Y, Z, the process of technical refinement that with the evidence group might actually show that actually it's not really a legislative matter. It's actually something that could be dealt with through policy or through regulation. So they'd suggest back to you that actually instead of proposing legislation, you propose a different mechanism, but still to achieve what you want to achieve. So also, for example, you could put a recommendation that actually said, local government should have, local government should introduce certain types of policies. And actually, when it was looked at later, it was actually realised that actually it's not local government that has that sort of, powers at the moment. So they wouldn't be able to do that. And so the evidence leads would be able to suggest back to you that, maybe rather than saying local government, it needs to be addressed to Scottish government, or alternatively, it could be that actually local government, your recommendation could be that local government needs to be given or have the power to be able to enact certain types of things. These are where you get to sort of think about where those recommendations lie. And any of the sort of suggestions and changes that are done there will be in a kind of clear and transparent way. It'll come back to you going, right, group 1 and group 2 had these types of proposals. They, essentially were about the same thing. So actually it's been at the 4th weekend, we're going to be doing a bit more learning. So we'll be repeating essentially some of the learning and the prioritising that we've done on the topic of diet and land use this weekend, but on the second aspect of our topic, which is actually around lifestyle and wider consumption. And then on the Sunday morning at the 4th weekend, we'll repeat what we're doing this afternoon, actually turning that learning into, well, where do we want to focus for the future? Yep. And so at the end of weekend 4, we'll be coming back to you, as I've just said, with all the stuff that you've done this afternoon today, after it's been through that process of consolidation and technical refinement. And it will be up to you then to actually have a look at it and review collectively and agree that these are the recommendations that you, as the stream that are looking at diet and land use, want to make. So they'll be coming back not just as the proposal that, Group 4 today came up with, but actually collectively of all of us who are working in this stream, recommendations on that behalf. Just catching up with where I'm in my speaking notes here, because this is important that we were all telling, in all the different groups, we're telling you the same things. Okay, and at that point too, there will be that opportunity to go, we're pretty sure we've kind of got the idea here of where we're going with what we want with our recommendation, but we might need some more information or some more time to consider the detail of things. So you will have that opportunity to be able to identify, and you can, facilitators will take notes today as well. If there are things that actually you think we're pretty much there, but actually we need more detail, we need more information before we can make sure our recommendations are most effective and most fair. And then at weekend 5, we'll do that process again, bringing back what we do at weekend 4 for you to review and reflect on and collectively see, does this sum up what we need? And then also as a group, still within our diet and lifestyle theme, you as the members will actually work to, I suppose what we're calling at the moment, supporting statements for each recommendation, so that actually it's in your own words, making that note of why they're important, why they're fair, or where they fit in terms of being fair and effective. At weekend 5, it'll be you, on behalf of the groups that have looked at diet and lifestyle, that will be responsible in a way for presenting these recommendations back to the rest of the Assembly for discussion and debate. And just like they'll be presenting back to you what the work they've done on travel and work and on homes and communities. And actually at that point, we need to look at the set of recommendations as a whole. So it's not just telling you these are our they won't be telling you these are our recommendations and you'll just accept them or not. They'll be making the argument to you as to why they're important, why they need to fit. But we will need to look at the recommendations right across the different streams to make sure that actually, are there things that are common between them that actually can be built together into something so bigger than the sum of its parts? But also, are there inconsistencies or contradictions between recommendations across the different themes that actually we're going to have to resolve before we put the full recommendations in the report to Parliament. And then at the 6th weekend, the whole Assembly will be involved in that set, looking at the full set of proposed recommendations, assessing them for those contradictions, gaps, or wider opportunities, and finally voting to endorse the recommendations on behalf of the Assembly as a whole. So I'm going to stop sharing now. Between now and the next time we meet, we'll send you a kind of written version of that kind of stepping out, what the different stages are, so you can consider it, see if you think there's something missing from it or something that needs to be done a bit differently. And when we meet in weekend 4, we will have that opportunity to have a bit of a discussion at the beginning of weekend 4, just about, are we all happy with the process that's proposed in terms of how we go about ensuring that we have recommendations that are driven by what you want to achieve, but actually able to be put forward on behalf of the Assembly as a whole. I'm going to stop talking in a moment. Don't let yourselves get too bogged down in the process of that this afternoon. Go with focusing on what things are important to you. But if any groups do have questions about the process that's being proposed, then I'm happy to be called into your breakout group just to answer any quick questions. Okay, so pretty much for the rest of the afternoon now, it's going to be over to you and your small groups to put some of the learning in place and start thinking, well, what are the things that we really think need to happen to both how should Scotland rebalance its diet and how should Scotland change the way it uses land to tackle the climate emergency in that effective and fair way. So I'm going to, one more thing to remind you before you go into your breakout groups. I know there was a lot of information in the presentations earlier. The videos and the transcripts as well, so the written versions of the content of the presentations are now up on your members hub, so where you can go in and find that information. So if there's things that you're remembering from this morning and you want to go back and get the detail, you should be able to have access to all of that there, that you can go back in, check out a bit of detail and bring it back in to your discussions. Enjoy your afternoon, and I'll see you just before 4 o'clock. 4:30. 4 o'clock. Just before 4 o'clock. I'll see you then. We've got some people coming back, so the groups are all closing now. And we'll just give people a few seconds for everyone to get back into this main room. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you've had interesting, fascinating, productive conversations, and I'm looking forward to getting a chance to have a look at all of the information you've been putting together regarding what sort of things you look at taking forward around recommendations, the types of areas that we want to really focus on. We'll have the opportunity to develop these up a bit further when we come back in weekend 4. And we will also, I know there were a few people who had questions around different things, needing a little bit more information around sort of specific aspects, and we'll try and get that too, so that when you're looking at these recommendations again, at the end of weekend 4, you'll have that bit of additional information to be able to sort of supplement them if needed. So really that's us going to wind up very shortly for today. Thank you all very much. Remember, we've only got 2 weeks till we come back together again for weekend 4, so a lot of the information will still be fresh in your head. A reminder that actually everything, all of the presentations you've seen and transcripts from them are all on the Members Hub and going onto the website. So you will have the opportunity, if you want to, if there was something that you kind of like comes back into your mind, you can go back, have a look, and have a look, and you'll be able to refresh your memory. A couple of other quick announcements just about the research survey. I know I mentioned it a couple of times. It's a really valuable way of giving us your feedback about what's working for you, what's not working for you, and how attitudes are developing as we go along. Lots of you are regularly filling in these surveys, and the link has just been posted into the chat there. You'll also be getting an email directly after the session today that'll have the link through. You can also find it on the Members Hub, so whichever way is easiest for you. And for anyone who hasn't signed up to do the research survey, it doesn't take a lot of extra time. Really easy to sign up. There will be information in the email that's sent to you that shows you how you sign up for it, and then you can fill these in each time. And just a reminder for people, when you are filling in the surveys, really useful if we can have them back by Friday. Not to me, the research team have asked me to ask if they can come back by Friday, because that gives them time to sort of look at all the information and help it feed into our next week time we meet. So that's really all I have to say. And I just, before we close the meeting, like to invite Josh to come and say a few words. He's been listening in on bits of the conversation throughout the day, and yeah, it'd be great to hear from him.
Yeah, hi everyone. Just a quick final couple of words just to say thanks so much for your time and your efforts this weekend. I've been listening into the diet and lifestyle stream, and it's been really, really educational for me. I've certainly learned a lot, and there's been some really constructive and respectful debate, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to listen in and work with you all as you start to shape recommendations. I think it's going to be something that's going to be great to see. We, as I mentioned initially, myself and the co-convener Ruth have a dedicated email address, which I'll share again in the chat. So if anyone does have any issues or concerns or questions that they'd like to raise with me or Ruth, please do get in touch with that. And I look forward to seeing you at the next weekend. Thank you.
Okay, and on that note, like I say, we can finish for today. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.